thanks to Brilliant for sponsoring this video. The United States is becoming less and less religious. As of 2023, approximately 3 out of 10 Americans claim no religious affiliation, and this has been rising year after year. But there's one place in the US that remains very much religiously affiliated: the halls of the US Capitol. According to data from the Pew Research Center, at the start of its 118th session, sworn in January 2023, the United States Congress is over 96% affiliated with a religious tradition, with only a single member describing themselves as religiously unaffiliated. An additional 20 members don't specify their affiliation at all. So is Congress immune to these larger trends in the U.S. population? As the religious landscape of the U.S. continues to shift, how much, if at all, has Congress shifted with it? And why are rates of religious affiliation so much higher in Congress anyway? The U.S. Congress consists of 535 members, divided between 2 legislative bodies, 435 members in the House of Representatives and 100 in the Senate. Now, technically, members of Congress are not required to practice a religion in order to serve, and they also are not required to reflect the religious affiliation of their constituents. In fact, according to the No Religious Test Clause of the U.S. Constitution, no religious test shall ever be required as a qualification to any office or public trust under the United States. But hypothetically, what if we did come up with some sort of religious test, a religious quota system of some sort that ensured that Congress more or less was a representative sample of the U.S. religious landscape? If we did that in the U.S., Congress would look something like this. Based on data from the Public Religion Research Institute, a Congress that roughly mirrored the U.S. religious landscape would be about 39% Protestant, 25% religiously unaffiliated, 22% Catholic, about 2% Jewish, and with everyone else at 1.5% and lower. This would include Mormon, Muslim, Hindu, Buddhist, Unitarian Universalist, Jehovah's Witness, and Orthodox Christian. But as I said in the intro, what we find is that Congress does not reflect these numbers. Now, quick aside, as I said in other videos, measuring religiosity is extremely difficult. I like to use the dimensions of religiosity published by the Modeling Religious Change Project, which says in order to measure religiosity accurately, you need to measure several factors at the same time: the intensity of religiosity, rates of belief in the supernatural, how often someone engages in private and public religious practice, and finally, religious self-identification. I don't know how often members of Congress engage in private or public religious ritual, or how many of them believe in supernatural beings or supernatural events. A much more in-depth and thoroughgoing study of Congress could probably find that information, but we're going to focus on that final dimension of religiosity: self-identified religious affiliation, measured by the Pew Research Center. So with that caveat in mind, breaking down the Pew Research data, this is what we find. Congress is 87.8% Christian, compared to 63% of U.S. adults. This works out to be 469 members who identify as some sort of Christian, mostly Protestant, with 247 Protestant members in the House and 56 in the Senate. The next largest Christian affiliation is Catholic, with 122 Catholic members in the House and 26 in the Senate. In the single digits, we have 9 Mormon members of Congress and 8 Orthodox Christians. So at the start of this video, I said that Congress is more religious than the US population, but it's much more precise to say that it's more Christian. This holds true when we break this data down to party affiliation too. 99% of Republican Congress members identify as Christian, compared to 85% of Republican voters, while 76% of Democratic members of Congress identify as Christian, compared to 62% of Democratic voters. So what about the non-Christian identifying members of Congress? The largest is Judaism, with 33 Jewish members of Congress, 24 in the House and 9 in the Senate. That's about 6% of Congress compared to 2% of U.S. adults. The rest are less than 1%, including Buddhist, Muslim, Hindu, Unitarian Universalist, and Humanist. This works out to be 1, 2, or 3 members of Congress per affiliation. However, by far, the most massive discrepancy is the religiously unaffiliated category. The U.S. Congress is 0.2% unaffiliated, compared to 29% of U.S. adults. So it's fair to ask, why? Why the discrepancy? Now, as with any complex political and sociological phenomenon, there's no easy answer, and I don't want to pretend there is a single answer to this question, but we'll focus on one possible factor, which probably won't come as a surprise. people tend to vote for candidates from their own religious community, and people harbor voter bias against candidates from specific religious communities labeled as outgroups. This is because of what sociologists call social identity theory. Social identity theory puts a fancy name to something that you probably have already experienced yourself just by being human. It argues that one of the ways that we as humans process information about other humans is through the lens of our own social identities. We tend to create boundaries between those belonging to religious in-groups and out-groups, and we tend to have positive feelings to those in our in-groups and negative feelings to those in our out-groups. Like I said, it's probably not all that surprising to hear that because it's intuitive, but now it's been empirically proven and measured in political candidacy. In a 2022 study, a nationally representative sample of Americans were asked a series of questions. Questions designed to evaluate if and to what extent voter bias exists toward political candidates from specific religious backgrounds. The study asked participants to imagine a hypothetical political candidate of a given religious affiliation, focusing specifically on Muslim, Jewish, Mormon, mainline Protestant, evangelical, Catholic, or atheist. Participants were then asked to rate their hypothetical candidate for a series of traits. To what extent is your candidate friendly, patriotic, compassionate, moral, assertive, ethical, and ambitious? Participants consistently evaluated Muslim, atheist, and Mormon candidates more negatively across the character traits as a whole. The study also found that Muslim, atheist, and Mormon candidates were considered less competent compared to other religious identities at handling a range of political issues, such as foreign affairs, education, or healthcare. The researchers labeled these three identities religious outgroups in American politics. Now, of these three outgroups, Mormon affiliation was evaluated slightly higher than Muslim or atheist affiliation, but still less favorably than other religious affiliations. The study also explored whether the religiosity of voters could affect their opinion of candidates. They found that while a voter's religiosity had very little effect on how they ranked in-group candidates, it had a significant effect on how they ranked out-group candidates. The stronger the religiosity, the more negatively voters viewed Muslim and atheist candidates. So, to return to our earlier question, if Congress members are not required to have a religious affiliation, why is it so much more Christian than the general population? It's all about the in-groups and the out-groups. If you want religiously affiliated folks to vote for you, you're likely going to face better odds as a member of a religious in-group. This may in part explain the higher rates of Christian members of Congress. The U.S. remains majority Christian, so you have more in-group voters. This also goes some way to explain the lack of religiously unaffiliated members, what sociologist Phil Zuckerman calls a branding problem for politicians, especially in the Democratic Party. He says Democratic politicians often speak to the politics of secular people, but don't want to take on the identity itself. Scholars of non-religion have found that rates of atheism in the U.S. appear surprisingly low considering the growing rates of religiously unaffiliated people. In other words, there are tons of Americans who are atheistic, but very few of them claim the label atheist for themselves. This is partly because of what sociologists call social desirability bias. Claiming the identity atheism is considered socially undesirable. So even if someone is atheistic in their worldview, they may not publicly claim that identity. And if voters view outgroup candidates as lacking positive traits and lacking the competency to address key political issues, then we can see why candidates might be reluctant to publicly identify themselves with these religious outgroups, particularly embracing a non-religious identity. The identity might be a liability to a political candidate. However, this does seem to change over time. Outgroups can eventually morph into in-groups. For example, Catholics used to face significant voter bias in the U.S. Opponents attacked JFK's Catholic identity when he was running for president.
But contrary to common newspaper usage, I am not the Catholic candidate for president. I am the Democratic Party's candidate for president, who happens also to be a Catholic.
But now Catholicism is one of the political in-groups of Congress, and the number of Catholic members of Congress have been steadily rising since the 1960s. However, all this to say, even though Congress is more Christian than the broader U.S. population, the number of Christians in the 118th Congress is the lowest number since Pew Research has started measuring religious affiliation, which may suggest that Congress perhaps is not immune to these broader secularizing trends in the U.S. Instead, Congress may just be a few decades behind. Thanks to Brilliant for sponsoring this video. In this video, we dove into some public opinion polling and data about demographic change, which is a little corner of the social sciences that relies on a bunch of quantitative methods, including statistics and data analysis. Data is everywhere, and if you want to learn the tools to make sense of it, then Brilliant.org is a great way to learn about data analysis and more. Brilliant is an online learning platform offering tons of courses on science, computer science, and math. They help you learn about topics ranging from gravitational physics to even casino probability. And these courses don't just force you to slog through them with brute memorization. Brilliant's courses are interactive and hands-on. For example, consider their Statistics 1 course, an absolute must for all you future political scientists and demographers out there. Through 35 lessons, you learn about hypothesis testing, margin of error, and sample variance. Potentially very abstract topics, but made much more relatable with interactive charts, graphs, and impressive visualizations. You can try everything Brilliant has to offer for free for a full 30 days. Go to brilliant.org/religion for breakfast to get a free trial, or click the link in the description below. The first 200 people will get 20% off their annual subscription. Again, that's brilliant.org/religion for breakfast. Thanks, everyone.